I interviewed the Syrian president in 2013 after a previous chemical weapons attack was blamed on the Assad regime. Will there be attacks against American bases in the Middle East if there's an airstrike?
You should expect everything. You should expect everything. Not necessarily through the government. It's not only the governments are not the only player in this region. You have different parties, you have different factions, you have different ideology. You have everything in this region now. So you have to expect that.
Tell me what you mean by expect everything.
Expect every action.
Including chemical warfare?
That depends. If the rebels or the terrorists in this region or any other group have it, it could happen. I don't know. I'm not fortune teller to tell you what's going to happen.
Bremmer is founding president of Eurasia Group, a global risk consulting company. Welcome.
Good to see you.
Give me a sense of what the implications of this action by this president are beyond Syria in terms of China, North Korea, and how the rest of the world sees Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, this is the first time that the foreign policy establishment and pretty much the entire constellation of American allies are getting on board with a foreign policy action by President Trump. We've seen it from the Canadians, the Germans, the Saudis, the Israelis. We've certainly seen it from both Democrats and Republicans in the United States. So as a one-off attack, you're not going to see significant pushback by the Syrians. They have no capability to do so. It feels good, and I think, there's a reason to do it. But let's keep in mind that if the United States had not responded to these chemical attacks by the Syrian regime, no one else was going to. That's a good reason to do it. It's also a good reason not to do it. There's a reason why Obama agonized over not taking this decision. Trump didn't agonize, he just kind of pulled the trigger. And that's precisely because now that Trump is saying, what he wasn't saying before, that the Assad regime needs a quick transition out of power, there's no way for the U.S. to affect that. Taking out one air base isn't going to accomplish that. The Russians are clearly not on side with the United States here. The Russians or the Iranians are the ones with the military force.
So do you think it was a mistake?
I think that if it turns out that it's just actually the one-off strike and they don't continue down a very slippery slope into a military engagement with the Syrians, then I don't think it's a mistake. But it's going to be incredibly difficult for Trump, now having changed policy towards Syria, to resist the inexorable pull into a complete quagmire. And let's be very clear. Trump is pulling back on foreign aid. Trump is pulling back on support for the State Department. Trump is not someone who's interested in supporting refugees. With the exception of these series of bombs, this is not a president that in any way had showed an inclination to try to engage from a humanitarian perspective to help the people, the over 500,000 that have died, the millions that have been displaced by this conflict. I don't think that changes with the series of 59 Tomahawk missiles that were used yesterday.
Syria is home to Russia's largest military base outside of Russia.
Correct.
This morning, the Associated Press wire is coming out. Russia suspends deal with U.S. to prevent mid-air incidents. Russia says it's going to help Syria strengthen its air defenses. How does this change our relationship with Russia?
When Trump came in, the single thing he wanted to do was greatest at odds with the Obama administration was a rapprochement with Putin. Now, of course, that's been undermined for all sorts of reasons over the course of the last couple of months. But it is over now, right? I mean, Putin directly condemned these strikes. The Kremlin has directly condemned these strikes. And the potential, if the U.S. were to further expand its military engagement in Syria, the Russians want to make clear that the potential for direct confrontation between the U.S. and Russia is significant. Now, I don't think the Americans are planning on taking that risk, Trump as president or no, but the fact is that the Russians are a significant antagonist of the U.S., and U.S.-Russia relations have deteriorated more in the last 24 hours than in any period that we saw under the Obama administration.
So does Putin have more to gain by coming back at the Americans and trying to respond in some significant way, or simply letting this pass?
I think they've made the statements that they need to make. The Russians have made clear that from their perspective, this was not the Syrian government using chemical weapons. It was them hitting a depot, and the rebels had these weapons themselves. They have, as just suggested, suspended the air cooperation where the United United States and Russia trying to deconflict the area. That's a significant statement. But look, the Israeli government has engaged in one-off strategic strikes against the Syrians before. The Russians have functionally done nothing. This is very similar. If the United States, as the world's only superpower, chooses that it wants to go and drone strike or bomb a country around the world, we can do that. No one's going to stand up to us on that. But that's very different than Trump saying, we now want Assad out. There's no mechanism for Trump to get Assad out. So this is a sugar high. And that reflects Trump's diet and it reflects the way he's engaged in this policy. But, you know, in a month's time and 3 months' time, U.S. engagement in Syria is not going to look like it has a win at all. And to the extent that Trump actually embraces, I want to do something in Syria, that's not why his base voted for him. And it's also not going to prove a foreign policy victory for the United States.
So this is being described, Ian, as his first international crisis. How do you think he's doing?
I think that the decision to let the Russians know right in advance was the single smartest thing he has done in terms of foreign policy. I think the fact that he had the right people in the room, that Mattis was engaged, he didn't, you know, sort of Hillary Clinton was suggesting yesterday, let's take out all of the airfields. Frank, I thought that was incredibly irresponsible of Hillary to do. It would have risked a significant Russian response, would have forced their hand. This was actually limited. It was tactical. It seemed commensurate to what the Syrians were doing. The only thing that I'd say that's thoroughly problematic that we need to think about as a country is that apparently it is okay for the Syrians government to have killed some 500,000 civilians with conventional means. We don't respond to that. But hit them with chemical means, we're going to respond. Is that really the message we want to send globally? Because that is what the policy is.
It's different when you see the pictures, though. You see the pictures and that changes everything.
I've seen pictures of Syrian refugees washing up on the shores of Europe,
right.
and I didn't see us respond to that.
Right.
Including,
Thank you, Ian.
children.
My pleasure.
Bremmer, thank you. It's always good to see you.
You too.